Okay, welcome back on this grayish Tuesday in the course Corporate Law and Regulation. We touched upon a few more real-life aspects of the transaction theater, the role play and the different items. I announced that upcoming week we will look at regulatory strategies by which jurisdictions tries to solve the agency problem, for instance, in this topic. Agency problem starts with the identification who is the principal and who is the agent. And to answer that interim question, the board, so the management, so the owners of the file ordners with the information, which is the subject of the scrutiny of the due diligence process by the buyer. There you could say that the agents are those boards and that the principals are the potential buyer or the shareholders. And what is then the agency problem? Related to the question that the seller is tricking the buyer with wrong information or that participants use the information to manipulate the market as in the share price of those companies. And I pull out one example of such legal instrument that tries to address potential disappointments around mergers and acquisitions, being the 13th directive of the European Union. As just one example. It's a complicated example in the sense that it draws on your knowledge of European law, and it's my attempt to invite you to keep that knowledge alive. Knowledge on what does directive mean? Answer, that's a piece of legislation from Brussels that 28 member states needs to transform, translate, implement in their local jurisdictions. So when you say 13th directive, that is just a piece of legislation of Brussels, which, because it's 20 years old, already is in the laws of Germany, the Netherlands, Croatia, Slovakia, Poland, France, etc. How is that used in law courses throughout Europe? That we discuss the directive, and with that we discuss 28 pieces of legislation in 28 states. It's a sort of efficient way to discuss local law. Secondly, directives and the European Union is the supranational level. And why would such a supranational, I always dare to say federal level, get involved in transactions that happen in Germany or in the Netherlands or wherever? And that's the same question 100 years ago the United States federal government asked itself. Because, as you know, in the United States, the private law, company law, is a state affair. So there's no such thing as American company law. You have 50 company laws in the United States of America. Here's the answer. Because those transactions are transnational, the marketplace will improve if you harmonize the laws in all those submarkets. Because the companies we talk about are not just in the Netherlands, they are in all the European countries. And it would be a total mess if in all those European countries different laws applies to the process of a fundamental transaction, a merger and acquisition. So the whole idea is a very old idea, because the United States did it 100 years ago, that they say, okay, we see that people start to buy shares from New Jersey to Delaware to California. Ooh, this will become a mess. A federal law. And the idea is that on different types of agency problems, there's a solution. And in Article 3, thank you legislator, they codified sort of initial ideas around the phenomena of a merger and acquisition. First principle, Article 3, the equal treatment of all shareholders. Because, ladies and gentlemen, in theory, a share is like a chair. And one shareholder could sell a share for $1 and another shareholder could sell it for $2. So there's no rule on the globe that says that all the shares are the same price. That is rather inconvenient if the ultimate goal is maximum of welfare. So let's get rid of that potential problem and funny transaction costs increase by stating equal treatment of all shareholders. Step 1. 2. Buyers should promise and guarantee that they have the purchase price available. So that not at the end of the show, the buyer says, oh, thank you for the contract, but I don't have the money. Which would be a stupid derailment of economic processes. 3, the idea that the shareholders of the target company should be the deciding party whether they sell or not. If you look at private law from a conceptual framework, this is a very funny principle, because it's at the heart of our capitalistic system since the Romans, that if you own something, you decide what happens. But in the course of the evolution of economies, there were sort of jurisdictions who said, well, but maybe those minority shareholders, they should learn to shut up. So let's not give them too many rights. And that is why in Brussels they said, oh, let's stay faithful to our core values. Owners should be able to decide. Remember, this is harmonization of local law. Article 3. So apparently there was a need. I don't know which member state was sort of having second thoughts about rights of owners, to which this was an answer. And so maybe one of you end up in Brussels and then you make these types of legislation and then you will find that you draft rather special clauses to address special member states who got lost in the process of rational thinking. So that's a funny thing. And last but not least, a principle that those shareholders should be given some time to consider the bid. Remember, on a daily basis, there are 20 transactions, major transactions, going on. So if, as a owner, you get a phone call, okay, you need to sell your shares tomorrow, and that's not sufficient time. Remember, major shareholders are, for instance, pension funds, which is your and my money, with the task to invest that in a proper way. And they have processes. So one of you will end up in a pension fund, managing those shares. And then you need time to consider the bid and talk to your boss and processes, with a democratic process in your own organization, and then you say yes or no. But if the economy would get hysterical sort of the pace of, you know, London, where people work 23 hours or 73. Those colleagues of yours who die at age 28 because they forgot to eat and sleep by doing 100 transactions on a day, which is possible, making a lot of money, no time to spend it. Hey, you all know those stories from the London investment banks, don't you? So the European Union says, okay, let's enshrine this whole idea, sufficient time, as principles, to take out the hysteria, potential hysteria in this whole marketplace. Question? No. Then, pertaining to public companies, Article 6, the offer should be made in a public way. And as of that moment, that's then the standard. Why? Because it's in the law. So that's a choice of a jurisdiction. Okay, let's make this public. With potential positive effects pertaining to shareholders, but also pertaining to supervisory authorities dealing with anti-monopoly behavior of players in marketplaces. If they don't know that there's a merger going on, they may miss the merger, in the broad sense of the word. So the idea to make it public has various considerations in the light of this increasing the total welfare of maximum of participants. And then Article 9, a fascinating thing, at the heart of the agency problem, the board should stay neutral. Which agency problem? The board has a preference for a certain shareholder. Imagine the board of Nuon. They had as shareholders municipalities. I don't want to say bad things about municipalities, but they earn a quarter of what you earn in the future. And their capacities and degrees are equally not where you are. So when you're a board member, you can easily talk over a shareholder and say, we need this, we need that. So they like not too intelligent shareholders. And when you are part of the Vattenfall concern, you have a CEO in Stockholm with a Fontainebleau, Harvard, Rotterdam Business School, Utrecht Business School, MBA, who knows how to manage a company and who gives you a lot of homework to run Nuon, now Vattenfall, in the way they like. So interests, preferences of board has a very personal side to it. Normally in the book it is about the financial component, who's paying me the most salary. But remember that the board is just the delegated management of the shareholders with the anxiety to be dismissed 24/7, and obviously you like the more kinder shareholders prefer to the, you know, strict shareholders. Like you like lecturers more who are sort of lenient with attendance list rather than me with the, you know, ticking the box attitude so far. And that is what is inside the agency problem pertaining to boards and management. And to solve that is to declare by law you're neutral, which is sort of polite phrase of shut up in the process. Provide the information to the buyer and go home and have the shareholders talk to each other. That's the idea. And then contract law. Let's move on. Let's move to the second theme of the asset transaction. What is the asset transaction? That the company A has certain assets and company B has an interest. And here you see the drawing where company B has its own assets and the other assets. When the assets are engineers, so people, this situation is that you put all those engineers in one room. So first they were in two different locations, like Stockholm, Amsterdam, and then combining assets when it is people, it is that you move all the Amsterdam people to Stockholm or all the Stockholm people to Amsterdam and you put them in one room. When the assets are machines, or when the assets are oil fields, then you have an oil field in the north of Norway, and then one mountain further there's another oil field, and this is Shell and this is British Petroleum or wherever. And then combining the assets is that you put the machine that is pumping the oil in this field and you extend the pipe so that they can pump this field too. So think of this in a sort of practical way. Assets in the broad sense, humans, machinery, oil fields, ships, etc. Why would you want, as a company B, the assets of the others? Well, because that is then growth. So if you have 10 engineers, you can produce 10 times the output of 10 engineers. And if you have 20, that is double the output. Last example, network companies. So this is Netflix and this is Google. Netflix has clients, you and me. Google has clients. There will be a day that one company purchases the other. I guess that Google will purchase Netflix at a certain point. And then on your login screen of Google, you will see bloop, advertisements of Netflix, and those accounts will be sort of connected. And that means that the asset is clients, and the ownership of the client means that all of a sudden you can make them pay more for what they are consuming. And that is physically that the database, which is 2 gigabytes, is just put from one hard disk to another hard disk in the cloud. That's putting assets together. And then the funny thing, that's a few of your other courses, is that the method of the database of one company and the other is not the same. And then when you're not lucky, you are on the department that should manage that. And then it takes you a full year to align those databases. Thank you, shareholders, for putting us together. It's a nightmare, you know. In the Netherlands, there are names with this Van Bemmelen. And Americans put the V first, and the Dutch put the B first as family name. And when you put those two databases together, then my name does not show up with the B, but with the V, etc. You know, and bank accounts and nightmares. So the beauty of the whole merchant and acquisition industry, 10 times a day, is that it results in 10 times a day total nightmare for the next 10 years. But we are used to it. We are doing it for already 100 years. And it keeps us busy. So part of you earn your money with, you know. And then the beauty is by the time you finish the alignment process of the assets, they sell it again and split it again. And welcome in the world. So what is, from a legal perspective, the trick behind a asset deal? First step is or the second step is no transfer of liabilities. An oil field is nothing, it's just nature, and an oil field has no liability. It's not an actor, it's not a natural person, not a database is not a person, cannot have liability. So the difference between a share transaction and an asset transaction is that the share transaction comes, like in a marriage, with the whole package. All the assets and the liabilities of the legal person are then yours. The beauty of an asset transaction is that you just get the asset, nothing more. However, each of the assets in, let's say you are present in 28 member states, and you purchase all the assets of another company that is present in 28 member states, and they all have a headquarter, so a building in each member state, then you need to go 28 times to a civil notary in the member state to put the office building on the name of the buyer's legal entity. When you purchase the shares of a company that owns 28 office buildings, then that legal person continuity theme just continues to be the owner of 28 office buildings, and with one transaction you get the whole package with all the buildings. So it is extremely complex if you realize how many assets Coca-Cola has in 199 states on the globe, and that you go to the Philippine legal system to purchase the ownership of Coca-Cola bottles, pieces of land where they park the bottles, cars where they drive around. So each time, I don't know whether you bought a car once, probably not, yeah, but then you have to go to the post office and put a new name on the car and maybe new license plates, and well, good luck in the Philippines to do so, well, or other countries, or the Netherlands for that matter. So that is why when you talk about purchasing a whole company, no one thinks of a asset deal, which is sort of the phrase, because it's a headache. And to make things worse, certain jurisdictions, for instance all the European member states jurisdictions, have special protection rights for employees. One of the major costs of companies are employees. So we talk about you and myself as assets, that sounds positive, but when you talk to entrepreneurs, they talk negatively about us because we are a cost. And the main incentive of mergers and acquisition is to cut costs. Two companies with two headquarters and two markets is less efficient than one company with one headquarter and one market. So you could, on paper, avoid all the liabilities being the salary payments of the next month of all the employees of a legal person by not purchasing a legal person and just buying the assets, and then the employees stay in the legal person that is not bought. And then the owner of that legal person goes to the judge and says, well, I don't have assets anymore other than employees, so I liquidate my company and send my people home. And then all the oil fields are then pumped by the personnel that is pumping anyhow with the other company. In the European Union and in the European economic area, including Norway and Iceland and Switzerland, there are laws in place that states, this trick will not fly. If you purchase a oil field, then you get the employees with it. Other example, in universities, we have cleaning personnel, or we had, but we like the subcontractors better. And when you sell the broomsticks and the buckets to the new independent subcontractor cleaning company, then the law says you get the former university employees that manage the buckets and the broomsticks, you get them with the broomsticks. Employee protection. So there's no benefit anymore in a asset deal because you get those employees anyhow. So that's another incentive to stick to share deals. Why is this relevant for you? Because it helps you to understand what a legal person is. That is all the goodies and the baddies, like a marriage, the assets and the liabilities in one legal person. And when you purchase the shares of that legal person, you get both the goodies and the baddies. And the sick personnel and the hidden gold mines in the oil fields. So good and bad as one package. That is probably the best reason to discuss an asset deal, because you better appreciate a share deal. Because the message is no one is doing an asset deal, roughly, unless you purchase one machine. And so, yes, companies purchase stuff from each other. So one exam question could be, Shell purchases, or the University of Utrecht purchases one car. Is that an asset deal? And that's, academically speaking, a complicated question. Because if a company purchases a car, that's not an asset deal. There's no letter of intent and there's no due diligence. It's just, I'm purchasing a car. Why? Because I need a car. So an asset deal should be understood from a sort of economic perspective, that you not purchase one car, but a conglomerate of economically relevant assets that can produce turnover. And there's obviously a gray zone. Because if you purchase 2 cars, it's still, I'm purchasing cars. If you purchase 10 cars, probably still, I'm buying 10 cars. But if you purchase 100 cars and drivers, you purchase mobility. That's a sort of economic concept, and then you are doing a asset deal. So here you see that the moment you define certain definitions, asset deal, share deal, there's a gray zone in between. When do you move from the one to the other? Note, there is no correct answer to the gray zone. The correct answer is that you say, this is a gray zone. Obviously, purchasing one car is not useful from an academic point of view to call it an asset deal. You know, with the whole theater. So somewhere, you say in your paper or in the exam, somewhere purchasing assets in a certain amount, depending on the circumstances, turns into a asset deal. How is that done? Well, confidentiality agreement, letter of intent, due diligence on the mobility. We, university, wants mobility of the personnel, you know, and the ICT and stuff like that. And the employee rights connected to it. What is the law behind a asset deal? That is local contract law. And then there's a funny thing with contract law, because if the assets are goods, so movable objects, cars, chairs, broomsticks,